Trump is set to meet with Putin in Alaska on August the 15th. Media reports and leaks ahead of this meeting, along with statements by President Trump and members of his administration, suggest that the two leaders may have discussed a plan in which Ukraine would cede some or all of the occupied territories to Russia in exchange for peace. This brings us back to the basics, the fundamental truth that violating internationally recognized borders through military aggression cannot lead to sustainable peace. In this episode, we explain why the idea of a territorial swap is dangerous, why it would undermine international law, destabilize the global order, and why neither Ukraine nor most EU member states are likely to accept it. You're listening to the Explaining Ukraine podcast. My name is Volodymyr Yermolenko. I'm a Ukrainian philosopher, editor-in-chief of UkraineWorld and president of PEN Ukraine. My guest today is Tatiana Harkova, a Ukrainian journalist and public intellectual, the head of the international department at the Ukraine Crisis Media Center and author of the podcast L'Ukraine face à la guerre, Ukraine facing the war in French. Explaining Ukraine is produced by UkraineWorld, an English-language media project about Ukraine run by Internews Ukraine. Before we begin, a quick reminder: you can support our work on Patreon. Your contributions are essential. We rely heavily on crowdfunding. You can also help fund our volunteer trips to frontline areas in Ukraine, where we support both civilians and soldiers. Donations are welcome via PayPal. You'll find all the relevant links in the episode description. So let's begin. So Tanya, let's discuss what is happening now. It seems that Trump is again showing his support or understanding of Putin, and Ukraine is again sidelined. We will see, because the news are coming every day. But let us come back to the basics. What are the conditions for peace? What should be the conditions for peace, in your opinion? And if these conditions are not met during this eventual Trump-Putin meeting, what will happen? What do you think?
So, we are recording this conversation days before Putin and Trump's meeting in Alaska, the August 15th. So, situation is really very dynamic. It's changing every day. But what we know for now is that once again, Trump, after his ultimatum for Putin, which was ended on the 8th of August, once again is trying to negotiate with Putin. He invited Putin, or maybe Putin suggested the idea they will meet in Alaska to discuss many geopolitical issues, but Ukraine first included in these geopolitical talks. What we know from many different sources, both official and unofficial, that Trump is talking about exchange of territories. He's talking about some unpleasant news for both parts. We don't know exactly what they will exchange, but let's come back. And we also know that he's dissatisfied with what Zelensky said a couple of days ago, one day ago. Zelensky was very clear in his statement. He said that Ukraine will not trade any kind of territory because this is not about Zelensky, and this is not about agreement between Putin and Trump. This is about Ukrainian constitution. So to let Russia occupy an inch of Ukrainian territory, Zelensky needs to have parliament's agreement, amendments to the constitution. So any kind of violation of law would demand the decision of Ukrainian parliament. More specifically, 300 of deputies should vote for these amendments. And behind these deputies, this is not about political class. This is also about Ukrainian society. So does Ukrainian society accept this legalization of Putin aggression? So a bunch of very important problems which are on the table today, and the pressure is very huge on both Zelensky and Trump and Putin, because what's at stake for Trump is also his role as a peacemaker. He promised to be a peacemaker in this war, and what's at stake for him if he fails, and the chances are still very high because it's not so clear if he will found common ground with Putin. So for him, it will be extremely dangerous. But let's talk about what is the vision of the just peace, of decent peace, as Zelensky put it a couple of days ago, for Ukraine. What does Ukraine want in this historical moment?
Well, Ukraine certainly wants the end of the Russian invasion. In the maximalistic vision, Russia should go away from the Ukrainian territory to the borders of 1991, and it was said numerous times by Zelensky, and by basically it is the idea that is supported by Ukraine, right? But I think that realistically many people understand that, well, militarily right now it's very difficult to regain these territories. But what is the red line, I think, for the Ukrainian society is accepting de jure, so legally accepting that the territories are gone. And that is precisely this trap that probably will be imposed on Ukraine, like accept legally that Crimea is gone, that Donbass is gone, and that maybe some other territories are gone. And again, we have talked about this numerous times. There is this legal contradiction in the Russian demands, because Russia follows its own constitution, and its own constitution was amended in autumn 2022, September, if I'm not mistaken, 2022. It was right after the brilliant operation of Ukrainians to liberate the Kharkiv Oblast, and then there was this very important move, historically important move by Putin, who said, well, now we annex 5 regions of Ukraine, meaning Crimea and 4 oblasts, and we include them, Russians include them into their constitution. We can have different attitudes to the Russian constitution. Of course, for us, it's not legal amendments. But if Russians said that they will not be satisfied with any territories except these that are included into the Russian constitution, and the problem is that many of those territories that Russia wants are controlled de facto by Ukrainians, meaning the city of Zaporizhia, the city of Kherson, the city of Kramatorsk, of Drushkivka, and Slovyansk, and many others. So the question is, what exactly Russia wants in terms of territories, right, according to its constitution?
Yes, and according to recent leaks, Russian position a couple of days ago was about that Ukraine should withdraw its armed forces from the integrity of these of Donbass regions, specifically Lugansk and Donetsk, which is clearly unacceptable for Ukraine, not only from the legal point of view, but from the operational and military point of view. Because if you look on the map and you'll see all these cities, all these cities of Kramatorsk and Slovyansk and Drushkivka and all these fortresses which were built during decades already, and they were kept. All these cities are pretty short distance from the front line, but they keep the defense. So from the military point of view, if you withdraw your armed forces from these cities, from these towns, and you let Russians in, it means that you are on a very disadvantageous positions behind, because later behind you don't have cities, you don't have towns, so you are in kind of the steppe, you're in the land, so you'll have technical problems to build your defense lines. So this is unacceptable, and everybody in Ukraine understands that Zelensky will never accept this idea that Russia eats once again these 4 regions. But you talked about realism. I guess it is important to highlight one important moment in this story with negotiations, where United States and specifically Trump is in the role of mediator. A couple of months ago, correct me if I'm wrong, it was in May, if I'm not mistaken, Ukraine accepted a full, unconditioned ceasefire with the only condition if Russia did the same. So it is already the maximum we can give. So it means that Ukraine if it is about ceasefire, it's about that Ukraine will not try to fight for occupied territories in the closest future. I mean, tomorrow, in the week, or in the months. So ceasefire, it means that we stop shooting. So this is what we can suggest now, saying that we'll come back to this issue later. But asking Ukraine armed forces to withdraw once again, it means that Putin will get territories he's fighting for already 11 years without combat. This is unacceptable. Another problem from the Ukrainian point of view is that from the very beginning of the arrival of this new American administration, Ukrainian position coming from Zelensky, but from everybody, was about we can make this ceasefire, we can just think about this, but we need solid security guarantees, because we do have this experience of stopping the war, like it was in 2015-16 in Donbass. We just make this demarcation line, we stop the combat, but what Russia does in such a situation, they prepare another bigger war. And this is not theoretical issue. This is a very practical one. We do know what Russia will do. So this is a certainty about that Russians will prepare another war if we stop without security guarantees. What kind of security guarantees? We talk about NATO. NATO doesn't want Ukraine in the recent future. We do understand that the alliance doesn't want a member with current war, with ongoing war, in a very risky situation. So we need to think about security guarantees. And we do remember this reaction of the American administration of Trump in February 2025, when Zelensky asked this question about security guarantees, and Trump had nothing to suggest. So there's a lot of cheating in these negotiations. So, and what Ukraine is not accepting now is this kind of cheating from the American side as well, because if you want to stop this war, you have to put your cards on the table. So Trump says Ukraine doesn't have cards, but let it be honest in this negotiation. Everything is clear. We are in this situation for more than 10 years. We do have our experience, and if we discuss a decent peace, by the way, this is an expression used by Zelensky recently, let's discuss it decently and openly, at least between partners. Between United States, European partners, and Ukraine, because we all know that Russia cheats every day. But let's be honest, between our partners, otherwise there will be no order.
So I think that there are several layers of this, right? The first layer is obviously the layer which is about values, about norms, about international law. So Russia violates international law. Russia violates UN Charter. Russia violates Helsinki Final Act that speaks about inviolability of borders. And if we legally accept that Russia gets new territories through the military conflict, we basically say that UN is gone, that international order is gone, that international law is gone. And the problem is that United States is a country that quite repeatedly was putting the international law, international order into question. What was always on the side of international law was the European Union. And here, if current American administration, and as I repeat, it also has a bad legacy with some previous American administrations. If America says, well, we don't care about international law, about UN Charter, well, European Union should care, because it is those things on which it is based upon. So if Americans are gone, Europeans should be much more involved. And I basically think that they will be involved, and therefore they will continue supporting Ukraine. All the states, all the EU member states, not all the EU member states, well, it doesn't really matter in this. If we have Hungary out, maybe Slovakia out, maybe Austria out, maybe some other countries, well, still the number of the countries that are supporting Ukraine are quite substantial. It will not allow Ukraine to win this war probably, but at least it will allow Ukraine not to lose this war. And therefore, I think
I think Zelensky has and Ukrainians have some room for maneuver. But there is another layer, this tactical or the pragmatic layer. And here, it's just I'm amazed all the time about either naivete of the American administration or kind of open cynicism. Because when you think that it's all about territory swap, territories exchange, and when you understand this thing that we just tried to explain, that Russia basically, if we freeze this war, if we freeze this conflict on the actual contact line, Russia will say, well, you Ukrainians still occupied the territories that we need, that are in the Russian constitution, and therefore it will not be the end of the war. Russia will have its legal reasons to continue the war. But even if we imagine this absolutely crazy scenario, which of course it will not happen when the Ukrainians go away from these territories that Russians consider as their own, like Kherson, Zaporizhia, part of the Donbass, what will stop Russia from saying that Odessa region should be included into the Russian constitution, Kharkiv should be included into the Russian constitution, Sumy, and then gradually grabbing this territory. So again, will it mean the end of the war? That's the key question. If you think in terms of ending the war, and you understand right now the Russian logic. If you don't care, if Trump doesn't care about international law, etc., about this idealist thing, but if we just stay on this idea of very pragmatic thinking, if you care about ending the war, you should understand that. You should understand the Russian logic, and therefore you should understand that what Russia suggests right now will not end the war, but will just, delay another and prolong it.
Yeah, but Trump's interest is pretty clear. His short-term interest. So he wants to end this war just for a couple of months, just to present himself as the peacemaker. So there is no strategically thinking behind what he's really doing at the moment. So we also understand that. So it's not about stable peace on the continent, which is an interest for Trump administration. He's interested in kind of making a deal just to make it easier for him to present, like media effect and whatever. This is not serious. But another important layer of the situation is that, look, what is really happening with Russia and with Ukraine and on the ground. Let's not forget that we are in a very particular moment, historical moment now, because Russia is getting extremely weak now. I'm not talking about battlefield because sure enough, they're much weaker on the battlefield than 3 years ago. And they are becoming weaker even with all the support coming from Iran and from North Korea and from China as well. But they are experiencing serious economical problems right now. And they are in the lowest point just now, if you compare to what happened 3 years ago. And this is crazy that at the moment when, if you want to win the war, to end the war, this is the best moment to create more pressure on Russia. I mean, be it economical pressures. Trump was talking about sanctions. And maybe, I don't know a lot of wars in the past which ended by economical measures, maybe Soviet Union, but this was a combination of factors. But you cannot end a war by economical measures. But specifically right now, Russia in a very good situation for us just to experience such a tremendous economic problems, to be able to start real negotiations. So, and at that very moment, instead of doing so, instead of introducing sanctions, even if sanctions are not the solution. So let's not have a lot of illusions. Trump doesn't have a lot of pressure, even with the secondary sanctions against India and China and Brazil. So price for oil. So it will be not enough to ruin Russia's economy in a couple of weeks, or even in a couple of months, but it will be enough to put pressure on Putin and on Russian government just to make some amendments about the war. And at that very moment, instead of maintaining pressure, they are doing this move about introducing once again Russia, or saving Russia in a way. So this is the thing that we Ukrainians, we don't understand, because when you have a war and you want to end this war, you put your pressure on the aggressor and you arrive at your objectives. You don't want to make war. We do understand that the Europeans, they don't want to make war. Nobody wants to make war. And Americans don't want to pay for war. Everybody understands that. But you can achieve your objectives by economical pressures. Remember, in May, a lot of European leaders were in Kyiv. I mean, Merz and Macron and some others, they were talking about the ultimatum for Putin. You remember that? And they were talking that they agreed everything with Trump, and they gave him, I don't remember, 2 days to react for a full ceasefire, and then Trump changed the agenda. So, and what is happening now? Now it was about ultimatum coming from Trump, and once again he's changing this pressure on Putin by inviting him for another peace talks. And the problem with all that is simply it doesn't work on the ground. What we see that Russia continue its strikes against, evidently, Ukrainian front, but not only on the front line, but also in the distant cities. So the war goes on, so there's not a solution.
And I think that, again, we will have this back and forth for quite a long time. So we were thinking, I think some of Ukrainians were thinking that when Trump was saying these ultimatums to Russia and basically threatening the sanctions and having a very harsh talk with India, for example, for buying Russian oil, I think Ukrainians started thinking that, okay, this is it, because according to many Ukrainian forecasts, and including our own here at UkraineWorld, we basically were thinking that there will be some kind of a honeymoon between Trump and Putin, and some kind of an attempt to find an agreement, and then Trump will be disappointed in the end, and then he will use other means. And we were thinking that in August this finally started happening, or in late July. Now we see again ups and downs. So we see again his attempt to negotiate with Putin, which also doesn't mean that it is final, right? It will end like this, and maybe it will go into another spiral of enchantment and then disenchantment and etc., which of course doesn't really help. But we also should understand that for Trump, the key thing is to get Russia on board against China. And China also is very careful about this. And I think they will not really like two successful negotiations between Putin and Trump. So we will see how things will develop afterwards. Afterwards, probably Putin will meet Xi Jinping, and probably the reaction of Trump to this eventual meeting will be again very, hysterical, nervous, and harsh, etc., etc. So that means that Europeans also should, I think they should lose their illusions about America right now. America could be on their side this week, and the next week not on their side, on our side, and then the week after again on our side, etc., etc. I think Europe should learn how to live without the United States, at least strategically.
Yes, exactly, because we're not talking about Trump. So we are not talking only about Trump or Putin. We're not talking about personalities. So when you look at the situation, you will see that this is about trust. So for many decades, United States were in alliance with European countries. So this is about NATO. This is about global and collective security. Now, when you have such a a regional leader, it means that United States are losing their credibility in the eyes of Europeans and in the eyes of Ukraine. And even, for example, now we are talking about this anxiety, we are talking about this fear, we are talking about that too many things rely on United States, but it will not last forever. So if United States behavior is like this, so sooner or later, there will be a reaction, there will be an action coming from Europe and coming from Ukraine. And let's not forget that Ukraine is now producing almost half of weapons which is used on the battlefield, and European partners are also seriously thinking about reinforcing their defense and their help to Ukraine, and they're not so much relying on what America can suggest, like security umbrella for Europe. So I think that the United States they lose a lot in this back and forth, in this vicious circle, in these negotiations with Putin, because nobody's blind, So we all rely on the United States right now, but tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, it will not be the case. And it'll be a good lesson. I'm sure it will be a good lesson for many countries, for Europeans and for Ukraine. So now we are trying to be polite. Zelensky is trying to be polite. Zelensky is trying to do everything Trump wants. We all remember this scandal in the old cabinet, and how all European leaders were trying to comfort Zelensky, but also to be polite with Trump, because a lot of things depend on the United States, and specifically, we all know what depend on the United States: Patriot systems, which protect Ukrainian sky from ballistic missiles, some other weapons, and some other things, but not a lot of things, So some weapons you cannot replace easily, but others you can replace. And I think a lot of intelligent people in Europe are thinking seriously about how do we live without United States. So this is not one-way game, If you play in this game, so sooner or later Europe will become independent from what can be done from the American side.
It is also important to look at the dynamics of Russian imperialism. Obviously, Putin wants to revive the Russian Empire. Putin wants to introduce a dynamics of the expansion. And this is what people around the world need to understand. Putin doesn't care about the specific territories. For example, here in the Russian demands, there is a clear contradiction. They say that 5 regions of Ukraine, again, Crimea plus 4 oblasts, are in the Russian constitution, but then they talk only about Donbass. Like we want Donbass, which means only 2 of these 5 regions, plus Crimea, but without mentioning Zaporizhia and Kherson, which is south. Right? So this is a clear contradiction, which means that, for them, what is important is the very dynamics of expanding, the very dynamics of getting new territories. And even if these acquisitions are small, they still can sell it to their audiences. We keep expanding. We keep changing our frontiers, our borders. We keep bringing those lands which are ours, quote unquote, back. But the thing is, if you look at the global geopolitics, we see that Russia is losing influence, right? We have seen how Russia has lost very quickly its influence in Syria. We have seen that Russia was unable to protect Iran from the Israeli and American strikes. Now, recently, we have seen the agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan, so it's a very long conflict that lasts for decades, and that Russia was playing very skillfully, mostly on the side of Armenia, but also, helping this conflict, also having this diplomacy, helping this conflict from both sides.
So it seems that the positions, and here American diplomacy was remarkable. So maybe Trump is trying to reach the same, and have this photo when Zelensky and Putin are shaking hands as Pashinyan and Aliyev, and he's behind. But this is obviously is not going to happen, at least in the near future. But Russia is retreating, and that's a very, very bad news for it, because it's focusing so much on Ukraine. We don't know what will happen with Belarus after Lukashenko dies, for example. So in probably 10 years or 15 years, we have seen that in Belarus, well, there are conditions for an absolutely different society. Ukraine is clearly, like, the hearts and minds of Ukrainians are clearly lost for generations to come for Russians. I never use the word forever, because history quite often comes back, but at least I think that, well, it's very difficult to find a Ukrainian who would say, I love Russia, right, today. So the Caucasus, Ukraine and Belarus, well, Belarus right now is more or less controlled by the Russians, but again, it's not forever. Middle East, maybe some other places. Central Asia, which is more and more, thinking in terms of absolutely different terminology than alliance to Russia. And therefore, I think it's also, this war, it's also an attempt to prove to yourself, or Russians are trying to prove to themselves that they're still strong, and that's the point.
Yeah, that's the point. And the logic, Russia is shrinking literally right now, and the logic of all historical things right now, we do see that Russia is becoming weaker. And you remember that the first day of this full-scale invasion, we were recording a podcast, and we were convinced that it was the last war of Vladimir Putin. And I guess today we're even more convinced that Putin is not eternal, so this is his last war, and he's losing this war because he's not achieving his objectives. He's losing his people, a million of soldiers. He's losing his economy right now. He's losing his influence. Well, there are some back and forth coming from American administrations, from Trump, but they're in extremely weak position right now. And this is important to understand that this instinct for expansion, which is for sure present in the Russian society, in the Russian political system, it is contradicting the reality. So this is also the war against the reality, as you wrote pretty often in the text you wrote about this war. So this is a war about reality, how Russians try to create this alternative reality in their propaganda, internal propaganda and external propaganda. We don't know what Witkov, what Putin told Witkov, for example, less than a week ago, and why Witkov was so glad and was convinced that finally we understand what Russia wants, and finally there probably will be a way out of this war. So there is a contradiction between what really exists, on the ground, in the economy, in the politics, in the influence, and what they imagine to exist, and what they convince some people, and probably Donald Trump is among these people. He convinced Russia is still great again, etc., etc. But the reality is it's like Trump saying that let's make America great again. But 6 months after his arrival to the presidency, we would not say that America has become more influential or more powerful, right? So there were a lot of problems as well. So this is about, and reality is stronger than your ideas and your thoughts about what's going on. So you highlighted all the weaknesses of Russia in recent battles in Syria, in Azerbaijan, and in Iran case as well. So they're losing. So let's not forget about the reality is on our side, is on the Ukrainian side. So we're getting stronger, even if, so for sure, everything is complicated and Ukraine is exhausted and society is extremely exhausted and a lot of people were killed. All of this is true. But there is nobody who will ask himself or herself what we are fighting for, because it's clear we are fighting for our territory, for our people, for our integrity, for our land, for our country. So when you fight for your country in its legal borders, so it's a quite clear thing. You can explain it to a 6-year-old, right? How can you explain to, I don't know, Russian 6-year-old why his father is dying somewhere close, I don't know, to Melitopol or in Zaporizhia region? What he forgot in this region. So this is about two systems. One important thing could sound probably a little bit radical. It's the very moment in September 2022 when Russia included 5 Ukrainian regions into its constitution. This war is not about territories. This is about the principle. So to forget about this problem, we have to dismantle this Russian constitution. In order to dismantle this Russian constitution, we need to do something about this Russian state. And it becomes inevitable. So, because otherwise it will be one constitution against another constitution, Ukrainian constitution against Russian constitution. So, but one of these constitutions is wrong. And everybody knows that Russian constitution, which is based on aggression and illegal occupation of the foreign country, is a legal constitution. But in order not for this situation not to repeat in the future, because after Putin there will be another leader and he will follow his constitution, we have to dismantle this constitution. In order to dismantle this constitution, we have to change the regime in a way where it will be possible to change the constitution and to change the geopolitical situation.
Yeah, all this seems to be very far away, but we believe that one day it will happen. And as you rightly said, in this current situation, either Ukrainian constitution or Russian constitution, at least in the question of 5 Ukrainian regions, is wrong. And of course, it is Russian constitution which is wrong, because these regions were included there through occupation, military occupation, invasion, through torture, through the act of aggression. Let's make a conclusion. So our episode is what should be the conditions for peace. And we believe that the conditions for peace should be international law. Coming back to the international law, coming back from this chaos, this lawlessness, to the international law. But that seems to be very utopian for many people. But many good things seem to be utopian until they're done, as one wise man from South Africa told us. But what is clear, that Ukraine will not, at least we hope, and this is what the Ukrainian president said, even if we cannot regain these territories physically right now, we will certainly not accept legally that they are taken away. And because it will be a violation of international law, and it will be a violation of major principles. So very pragmatically, still ceasefire is possible, and maybe some kind of a freezing of this conflict is possible. It will be kind of a repetition of what happened in 2014, 2015, unfortunately. And that will mean that the law will last for years to come, that the problem will not be resolved. And again, if Ukraine accepts the illegal annexation of its territories, the war will not be resolved, because Russia will say, okay, I want other territories too. And that is unfortunately the reality which we are facing, with Americans or without Americans. This will unfortunately continue until Russia radically changes and maybe something happens with the head of the Kremlin.
And one last remark, let's not forget that this war can be won militarily. So the only problem is the political will. For sure, all resources and all the capacities on the side of our partners, I mean United States and United Europe and Ukraine, to fight back and to destroy Russia's war machine. But there is a problem with political will and nuclear threats and all this stuff. But let's not describe the situation as if Russia is so strong that nobody can defeat it. And that's why we are here to discuss this kind of what can be done tomorrow, this ceasefire. Ceasefire is a compromise which is only due to the weakness of the political will of the Western leaders, to start with United States and European leaders. So there are all the capacities and all the resources needed to destroy Russia right now in 2 weeks. But as for now, the political will is not here, and that's why we discuss these compromises and this kind of ceasefire and frozen conflict and some other scenarios which are even worse than that.
It's the powerlessness of the powerful to make the formula of Václav Havel upside down. Unfortunately, we're now facing this, and as the power of the powerless is a capacity of people to go against the most vicious tyrannies, and is an idea that any tyranny is actually inside has weakness and can be defeated. The reverse formula, the powerlessness of the powerful, means that democracies can also be weak, and they can be weak out of certain, hopelessness, and out of certain disbelief in their own strength. Let's put it in this way. And we see it in Europe and we see it in America, but in different aspects. Okay, thank you, Tanya, so much for this conversation. And this was our attempt to understand and explain what is going on.
This was a podcast explaining Ukraine by UkraineWorld, an English language media outlet about Ukraine. My name is Volodymyr Yermolenko. I'm a Ukrainian philosopher, editor-in-chief of UkraineWorld and president of PAN-Ukraine. My guest today was Tatiana Oharkova, a Ukrainian journalist and public intellectual, the head of the international department at the Ukraine Crisis Media Center, and author of the podcast L'Ukraine face à la guerre, Ukraine Facing the War in French. Let me remind you that you can support our work on Patreon. Your contributions are essential. We rely heavily on crowdfunding. You can also help fund our regular volunteer trips to frontline areas in Ukraine, where we support both civilians and soldiers. Donations are welcome via PayPal. You'll find all the relevant links in the episode description. Thank you for listening. Stay with us and stand with Ukraine.